Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's time for another Far Verona lore stream, and I'm super excited. And obviously, according to the spreadsheet that I've got here, you're also super excited to the tune of 121 questions about the universe of Far Verona. So thank you. Thank you so much. 10 blessings upon you. Space Cateers for delivering all of these questions. I'm obviously not going to get to, cause we got 2 hours and I cannot answer one question per minute. My QPM is not one. But I will answer as many as I can. And we'll talk about all of the little bits and pieces of Far Verona lore that you are curious about. So before we get into it, I guess like spoilers probably will come up if that's something that you are worried about. If you're watching this and you have not yet watched episode 6 or earlier of the live show, if you're behind, say like Faction Turn 2, you haven't watched that yet, there is definitely some degree of spoilering likely to occur. So just, be aware of that. Otherwise, just like my brain is not a supercomputer in the sense that like once I say something or I make a declarative statement about something, I try to remember what I've already established. But if I contradict myself, look at it as an opportunity to see the universe as being complex, and that there isn't necessarily one truth to any given thing. I can't contain the entirety of Far Verona in my head, and that's, partly on all of us, right? It's partly on all of us to use the wiki and to build that. And there are so many of you making so much cool stuff. So if I contradict myself, like, look at it as an opportunity to discuss. Sometimes what I think is cool in the immediate moment, I may change my mind about later, or I will go with whatever the first thing that comes to mind. Or we can blame the guild. We have that opportunity before us as well. Thank you so much for coming. If you are already a subscriber to the channel, fucking super thank yous. Excellent, thank you for that. If you resubscribe or subscribe during the stream, I'm not gonna pause to be like, hey, thanks every time, because we'll never get through these questions. But know this, I appreciate you. Thank you. All right, my friends, let's get into the thing. So House Crux is our very first our first questioner. Our very first questioner comes from Kessler. In House Crux. And of course, House Crux's first question is about themselves and how important they are. So the first question is, was House Crux always a major house in terms of the major-minor house divide? I feel like the houses major and the houses minor, like that division between the two, may be like a relatively, in terms of the timeline, and maybe a relatively newish thing. Like, I don't know that it was set up immediately, and I think that it's only recently like a formal division. I think probably before what determined whether you were a major house or a minor house was like based on how influential you were and how much real estate you owned and what you contributed to the imperial GDP and like all of that stuff. So I think probably that was all quite informal before, but after the Blood Eagle and what have you, I think it became a formal division. And I'm not sure, like, I feel like this is the kind of thing that would be pushed by, like, Eridanus of anyone. Like, it feels to me like there's so much kind of nuance that on paper, the houses major and the houses minor are, like, fairly easy to divide, but it's not necessarily based just upon like size. So I guess, I don't know, I'm not sure if Crux was always a major house. I feel like, based on my understanding of their like attitudes and the way that they function in the Empire, I think probably Crux has always considered themselves to be a major house. Whether they actually were or not, I think informally, yes, they always were considered kind of like a pillar of the empire, but I don't know that that was always strictly true. But again, no one else, like that's true of the whole subsystem, right? Yeah, so like kind of an answer there, not necessarily. I don't know, you know. Um, so our second, we got a question here from a former House Triangulum noble, now a member of the UPC that goes by the name of Mr. Candles. Mr. Candles asked, how extensive was the crux purge of Triangulum's VI AI scientists, and was it brought about by perceived disloyalty from Triangulum? So this is something that came up a lot, actually. I've had a couple of questions about this in between. I think it depends on how quickly any given member of House Triangulum, like the folks who are close to to House Cygnus, right? The researchers that were being directly paid to create the technologies that created the synths. Those were the ones that Crux were like, you're not the bad guys directly, but you're also like very close friends with the bad guys. So we need to like look into that. And I don't know that it was like a purge in the I don't know that it was a purge in like the Pol Pot sense of the word, but it might have been a purge in the like Soviet Russia sense of the word. In that it was like, listen, either you completely like come on board. I will say this, early on in the crux crusade against House Cygnus, there was a sudden burst of technological advancement in House Crux from their new friends in Triangulum, who wanted to prove to House Crux that they were loyal to the Emperor and not to the false Emperor Cygnus. Yeah, it's the bit like I don't want to call Triangulum a bunch of former Nazi scientists, but there is a bit of that, like, listen, you can get purged and we'll send you to the prison planet, or you can help us fight your former employers. I don't know that it was about perceived disloyalty. It was just basically like, okay, look, so the tides have turned, and I think that a lot of Triangulum scientists probably had a certain naivety about their research until recently, right? Until this big situation happened. This police action against House Cygnus happened. I feel like there was this naivete in House Triangulum about like science for the Imperium. Like, science is great, and we're gonna just learn things, and we're all getting along, and we have all of this money and privilege and space and time, and everything's gonna be great. And then politics got in the way and kind of reminded House Triangulum, like, oh, fuck, like we actually are performing this science for a specific regime, and the regime is changing. So yeah, I mean, I think that the more politic members of House Triangulum were just like, no, that's cool, fuck you, House Cygnus, it's cool, we're gonna do other things now, we're gonna go help Crux make anti-synth atomic bombs and what have you. So like, the more politic scientists jumped on board quite quickly. And I think that there were a lot of probably folks who were just like, I don't know, we just wanted to make cool robots. And then they might have gotten purged because they couldn't play that game. That doesn't mean that, and I've said this to Triangulum a bunch of times, just because something is Maltech doesn't mean you're not still researching it. You just have to fucking do it on the down low, right? Now, I think it's just as likely here that during this situation, like we're putting a fairly close needle focus on Triangulum right now, but I definitely think that there was a bunch of Triangulum scientists that were like, wait a second, the Empire is funding us and stuff, but like this thing with Crux and Cygnus, this is bad for science, like capital S science. We are going to quit. We're going to go and join the UPC, like Mr. Candles here, or we're going to become vagrant, or like, listen, science is more important than Empire. And I think those idealists are probably still out there, and some of them have turned into like dangerous Maltech weirdos. But some of them are still doing good work. They just have to do it outside the Empire because Crux was like, join us or die, right? Like, What's interesting, I think, is the idea of like House Triangulum and their balance between science, and this is true of like Pixis for exploration, Vela for maintaining trade. All the noble houses have this thing where they're like, is our portfolio more important for humanity at large than like this current political struggle? And do you see synths and House Cygnus as a threat to humanity or a threat to the status quo, and kind of where do you land on that? This is why Vagrant and the UPC have like a fair amount of former nobles and their families as part of their organization, because this crux situation and Cygnus and this whole like war, I think, divided people in a really significant way. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting, this idea of like nationalism and patriotism and imperialism and noblesse oblige, but like, how does that balance against like humanity at large? This is what created the CHR. This kind of thing is like, what do you care more about? The things that you are passionate about, or the overarching status quo of your own civilization? And if you ask House Crux, their ideals, I think, for the most part, at least externally, is like, look, everything we do for the Empire. It's not about House Crux. House Crux is an implement protecting the Empire. Even those like misguided souls that think that the Empire is not as important as their own selfish portfolios. There's always going to be people in Acheron Row that are caught between that divide. Like, what is more important, the individual or the larger whole, right? And how does that get expressed? Yeah. So kind of went off base with the core question there, but yeah, that's kind of where I see Triangulum's angle on the whole like crux, bringing the hammer down on people connected to House Cygnus. I mean, now is the time of purges. We're still going through that process because the war is technically over, but there's all of this other action going on, right? We're still cleaning up. And until there's a new emperor, and until we have like the empire reestablished, there's still going to be a lot of like, handling, a lot of like dealing with this stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of where that's at. Foodmaster Pixis Overboard of House Pixis asks, what is your opinion on the food that all the factions have been putting up? I know you've used fizzy cheese already, but how likely will it be that other foods appear in coming episodes? I mean, food is a really great way to express culture, or lack thereof. Right? Like the fizzy cheese thing, I was like, well, what would survive on a planet like I feel like on Honglu, it has its own. Honglu is like a huge like cultural force in terms of language and in terms of things like music and food, because there's so many people on Honglu. Like, it's a big population, and their stuff gets exported that way. And so like they have their own food that is probably derived from the original culture that founded it, right? So I'm thinking a lot of like dim sum, a lot of like sort of Vietnamese and Thai like cuisine, probably like Indian influence, and then on top of that, Acre, right? Like Acre is the universal. Acre is the like. Acre is it's the McDonald's of the universe. You are going to find those exact same fizzy cheese machines everywhere that Acre has a presence, right? And that's my way of kind of saying, like, look, there's this dump of a hotel that they're staying in, but there's an invincible food dispersal machine. Like, I don't include things in the game either as backgrounds or directly on the screen unless I want them to say something. All of my set pieces are relevant. And so I chose, fizzy cheese for the fizzy cheese opportunity. So yeah, I mean, I'll continue to look to I'll continue to look at the wiki and look for little things to include when they are the right note to kind of create the tone that I'm looking for. So yeah, I mean, food and music and like little cultural things are super important to me as details within the setting. Yeah, so I'll keep looking at those. Yeah, I mean, I imagine Fornax has like a deep barbecue culture. Delicious. Sean of House Serpents. I imagine Sean is probably not the character's name, but on behalf of House Serpents, Sean is asking, is there an Imperial fleet? And if so, are they still around? Ooh, man, the Imperial fleet is a topic of high conversation. I think it comes up a lot because it's this fairly massive strike fleet with capital ships and all of this good stuff just fucking hanging out in the space yards of Imperial Prime. Like, just literally just like massive, like a generation or two old battleships and warheads and like all this shit. Just no one is able to touch it. And every single day, I guarantee every single day in the Imperial halls of the Senate, somebody is like, listen, we need to borrow that ship. Imperial mom, Imperial dad, we need to borrow those ships. We could use them for fill-in agenda here, right? Crux is constantly saying like, hey, just give these to us and we will finish our crusade. Pixis is like, can we have these? Because we could definitely use these to explore and maybe find like lost houses and we could expand the empire. Like, come on, give it to us. Everybody wants it, but nobody is willing to let anyone else use it because as soon as you get your hands on the Imperial fleet, whoop, you suddenly become very significantly powerful. And nobody wants to break it up because if it's split up among all the different houses, there's that argument, who gets what? And then also, like, what happened? What's the point of becoming emperor, right? Everybody thinks that if they hold out long enough and if they politic and if they debate, they're going to get a hold of the Imperial fleet. And then they get some shit, right? Then it's a good, yeah. So like, I feel like it's one of those things where it's the loaded gun in the middle of the table and nobody wants to let anybody else have it because they're scared it's going to get pointed at them. Yeah, and everybody would use it for their own agenda. So we've all the noble houses have just kind of agreed to make sure no one else gets a hold of it. It's a dangerous and powerful asset in the center of the universe. And yeah, I mean, I think the codes to activate it are locked away in some Imperial vault, only openable by the keys of the noble house. Like, everybody has to kind of agree, like, yes, this is the new emperor, and that's what we that when we make that agreement, then yes, the new emperor can unlock the vault, gain access to all of that stuff, and and get all the secret knowledge in the big spaceships and what have you. So it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. It's a big deal. Yeah, right. The signet ring of all the house leaders, like, yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, nobody has current access to it, but who knows, right? Like this is the thing, and that's phase 2, right? Like, post Imperial election is phase 2 for me. Like, the opening of the Imperial Vault is going to require a lore stream on its own, and then also I'm going to have to send a document just to the house that becomes the Imperial House and be like, so you've opened the Imperial Vault. Here is what you know. Secrets of the universe. So it's gonna be the beginning of sort of phase 2 and how all that goes. Yeah, I mean the House Cygnus, I feel like their Imperial codes probably fell into the hands of the church, maybe, or Crux has. No one's totally sure about that right now. There's protocols for this stuff, but essentially when you right in before the empires broke, plot twist, the vaults are empty. So yeah, I'm not, no one is really sure right now, but it doesn't really matter. Like, when the vote is made and we open the thing, it's not going to be like, oh, who gets the thing? Because don't think about the signet rings as being like literal physical objects. Some of them are, but like we talked about in the episode, there are like other ways to verify. Cool. All right. So Carver of House Pixis. This is a good question. So Carver of House Pixis asked, how advanced is VR in Acheron Row? Do we plug into a virtual realm with all our senses, or is it more like what we have now with a headset? So this is a choice that I'm making aesthetically about the universe, right? Because as far as sci-fi goes, if you say there is a fully developed cybernetic, like cyberspace matrix realm, it brings up all of these other like weird questions about the universe and like our place in it, and like, is reality real or is the cyber world real? And like you get deeply into cyberpunk stuff, and like, I'm not really about that. I think that there just isn't any kind of virtual reality. I think that it's just not a technology that was, I think it was abandoned as not being viable. There's no like plug into your brain type of thing. We have cybernetics, but I don't think any of those are brain computer interfaces. Simply because I just kind of want to avoid that as a thing, right? Like, I'm just not interested in that. So instead, we have holograms. We have more augmented reality. So like the pilot sim that we saw, is not virtual reality. It's literally like we've had that technology since the 90s. It's just like a theme park ride. It's a bubble you sit in and it projects holograms, but you're not in virtual reality. You're just looking at a very complicated screen. There's no brain machine interface. There's no rigging. There's no, like, I just don't see that as being a thing in this universe, because I don't want to get into that, like the Matrix and like, I mean, the difference between a big chunky helmet and like a bubble, like, I think there's probably still tech that's goggles and gloves and stuff, but it's certainly not even as advanced as like most 80s cyberpunk presents, because again, it's thematically kind of not what I want. I want things to be in the real world. I don't want to explore that aspect of cyberpunk. Yeah, and I don't think like even a holodeck is too much. Like, I'm thinking like obvious holograms, like Cortana style, like that kind of thing as a hologram. I'm thinking like Minority Report style. Like, I love that. That's absolutely a thing. Like motion sensitive, like heads up displays, and that kind of stuff. But anywhere in the book that relies on direct brain interface, like cybernetics, that stuff, you find another way to make it work. Because that's just not something technologically that I'm super interested in the setting. Yeah, Tony Stark UI. Yeah, that's about where computer human interface, that's the direction that the technology of this universe went. Yeah, Blade Runner 2049, big holograms, like mostly like, yeah, transparent people. Like, yeah, I think that's reasonable. Yeah. Now, sci-tech is a whole other thing. Sci-tech using psychic abilities, amplified psychic abilities to project images into people's minds, that's cool. That's good and cool. Definitely. That's completely a thing. That's where we can start fucking with like the direct ability for people to perceive things, because you're psychically messing with their brain and fiddling with what their brain can perceive. So yes, that gives us space for that, because again, it's like about emphasis, right? Like, if you can just plug into VR, it takes away some of the coolness of a psychic being able to project holograms directly in your brain, or like mess with what you can see. It takes away some of the magic of that, and I want sci-tech to be more impactful. So to do that, I have to kind of bring down some of the technology around it. Yeah, and I know that there are some people who are already thinking about lore that is based in this like deep VR, but that's not really where I want to go. I'm sorry if you have to adjust your lore as a result, but that's how these streams go. That's how it goes. And again, like there may be exceptions here and there. Maybe they're probably Triangulum scientists trying to create a virtual world, but they are underfunded and they are not. This is what the guild does, right? The guild is about fake realities. We live in Acheron Row and we got shit to accomplish. Yeah, they're guild fanboys. Cool. Okay. Savii Eridanus Armand Veron of House Eridanus asks, how do you foresee the sector's labor shortage affecting the depiction of various locales? For example, Tiber's production of tropical commodities has fallen drastically due to the lack of synths to harvest them by hand. Yeah, right? Okay, so House Eridanus wants to know, how does the labor shortage... I don't know. Like, I need to do some research. I need to do some, like, personal... Me and House Eridanus need to do some research about real life labor shortages in this regard in like a really deep way. Like there were like billions of, or whatever, millions or billions of there was a labor class, a free labor class that did all of this like skilled work. We never really built much mass production except of like things that humans can't physically do, right? And this is what's weird about this universe, is that instead of making robotic mass production facilities, we moved away from those. Like we built them. We built these robots and the robots built shit and stuff, but eventually they just kind of like got pushed away because instead of having like a dumb robot build your car, you could build synths who were genetically engineered and programmed mentally to be car artisans, right? So like the Empire, when we still had all these synths, everything you had was made by hand, right? Everything was made by hand by like perfect genetically engineered superhumans, right? Whose only purpose was to like knit your fucking your clothes or make your jewelry, or like these, and there were billions of them, and then we had to kill them all, and now we're all suffering for it because this is the thing that you have to do. This is the danger, and I think I don't know. Like, I guess the Black Plague is an example of like this happening in real life, where we had this like massive slave labor class, and then they all just fucking died. They were just gone, and now we have the serfs kind of filling that space. And previously, the serfs were all kind of like, their responsibility was like to oversee the synths. In a lot of ways, I don't know. The economy's all fucked up right now, and this is the place where like I don't know that we have a modern like example for this, right? So I don't know. I got to do some economic research. What is it like when an entire labor class just fucking vanishes? Yeah. So it's like a whole thing, right? The Black Plague killed everybody, not just the lower classes. No, so that's the thing, is like the technical knowledge wasn't lost with the synths. We still know how to do these. This isn't a fall of Rome situation, because we can still make the roads. But it's like we just don't have enough people to do the work because we killed them all. Yeah, there isn't really any like, yeah, there isn't. So it's a whole thing. So yeah, I don't know. We got to kind of figure that out together. Yeah. So I guess we'll see. So let's see here. Dark Vlagor of the 14 Red Dog Society asks, now that Discord Dog's been working on it, how do you think the charity is generally perceived across Acheron Row? In the common knowledge, do most people think they're legit, or do you think most people know what's going on but don't say anything? So I think the deal with the Red Dogs is they're seen a bunch of different ways depending on where you live and who's telling you information. Like, on Honglu, the 14 red dogs are probably seen fairly heroically, right? The people of Honglu are like, yeah, they're taking care of us, and House Cygnus fucking sucked, and they've like freed us from these jerks, and they're great, and they're making sure that we get medicine and food, and like everything's great. Like, thank goodness for them. We're all part of the pack. Like, I bet you most people on Honglu think that the red dogs are great and awesome, even if the red dogs are also like, you know, selling heroin to your grandma. Because, you know, you take what you can get, even though they're doing bad things, and maybe, you know, maybe your cousin owed them a bunch of money, so they broke his kneecaps. But they're getting things done, and they're better than the last guy, right? And this is very typical of sort of colonized people trying to overthrow their colonizers, right? Because like Honglu was settled by the ancient settlers and owned by House Cygnus, and House Cygnus, of course, was overpopulated. It was they had given lots and lots of people to this planet to build the synths. The synth factories were shut down. There was this horrible war. Cygnus had to go and fight with Crux, and during that time, the Red Dogs were like, let's get rid of these jerks. So, you know, it's a situation where I think things are on a pivot, right? You're on a precipice, Red Dogs, because you could either turn over a new leaf and be good and take care of the people of Honglu. That's hard work, right? And I think that there is an opportunity for them to become the power behind the throne, right? Because there are these other, they're not factions, but there are these other powers at play on Honglu. There's the loyalty brigade. There is this sort of militia, military junta thing that is woven in with the Red Dogs, but it's not exactly part of them, right? The Red Dogs don't have total control over them. So there's like the criminal underworld / charitable organization that is the 14 Red Dogs, and there's also the sort of junta trying to like seize control, the military that did this. But I think that if you are outside of a Honglu, if you don't live there or you're not directly connected to that situation, I think you probably see all Hongluans as the same, right? I don't think that anyone sees them as independent organizations. Some people probably think that they're a vagrant conspiracy. Some people probably think that they're just like uppity colonists, and that eventually, once we deal with all this Cygnus stuff, House Crux will go over there, kill off the junta, and be like, well, all right, fuckers, this is our planet again. Start using these factories for things, right? It's a former imperial planet. So, but yeah, I mean, I think as with a lot of things, it depends on where you're getting your news and where you live. And I think that for the most part, Prism portrays Honglu kind of monoculturally, but hey, Dark Vlegar, like, ask Prism like how they portray you, because my impression is that for the most part Honglu is one thing, and that most people don't know who the Red Dogs are. But that angle of like, are we a criminal organization? Are we a charity? How obvious is that front? You know, that's going to be something that as time goes on, I see an opportunity. I see an opportunity for the Red Dogs to make a deal, maybe through Prism, with the Empire to become a protectorate rather than a like a state, right? Like, there is definitely an opportunity here in the future for the Red Dogs to negotiate, like, hey, we're going to pay massive taxes to House Eridanis in exchange for semi-autonomous control of the planet, right? Or if that fails, I imagine there will be a reclamation of Honglu. Honglu's future hangs in the balance, and how the Red Dogs handle themselves vis-a-vis the other factions, that will determine kind of what ends up happening. Yeah, so there you go. Cool. I hope that answers your question. Obviously, there's a lot of focus on Honglu right now. Honglu's in a weird place because they owe the government. Well, they don't owe the government anything, but House Cygnus and like the government of Honglu owed back taxes to the empire. Who's going to pay those? Right? Like, can you get that forgiven if you become the official like government? It's a lot, right? There's a lot going on there politically, and I'm really curious about it. And if you're interested, right, like look at the history of Vietnam, look at the history of China in like the 30s. Really look at any country that has been colonized and decolonized and the way that those things have flowed over time. Yeah. Remember, on Honglu, life is cheap and plentiful. Yeah. Does anyone really want Honglu? I mean, Honglu has the infrastructure. Like, it was a major planet for synthetic manufacturing, right? So it depends on where we land on synths. This is the kind of like between Blade Runner and 2049 thing where like here's the thing. I could imagine a future where House Triangulum comes up with a new way to make synths where the synths are like featureless, genderless, mind controllable. They're like the if you watch Westworld, they're not the hosts. They're the weird like kind of android looking like faceless biped servants. If Triangulum could figure out a way to make those, and they could sell that to the rest of the empire as a like, hey, we could use this for something, or I don't know, sell it to Acre, or like we could get a legal concession for like pseudo synths. Suddenly, Honglu becomes crazy valuable because the factories they have technically cannot be used to make anything legal. They are illegal factories, but I think that unlike on GATS, most of them are still intact. No one is allowed to use them for anything, but if you could, right? It's like all of a sudden you have some legitimacy to the business operations that you can run. So I don't know. That's an angle that again the Red Dogs could push for. That like, listen, we could pay off our debts. Give us like 10 years of imperial control where we pay off our debts, and House Eridanus, once we've paid it off, then let us operate as a secondary planet. Yeah. Now, if there was to be a re-uprising, if there is a synth underground or whatever, if they were ever to organize in any way, I mean, right now they're not, but like in the future, in like Far Verona Act 2, I could very easily imagine creating a faction of like uprisen synths. I could see that being possible. I talked about this at the beginning of the game, right? Like, just because we have the factions that we have and we have the situation that we have doesn't mean that won't change, right? We're going to get an imperial house, maybe ostensibly. I'm going to add new factions as we go. Like, this is a thing that will change over time. So I could very easily see in a future act that I could be like, cool, it's going to be a small faction, and here we go. That faction would see Honglu as being a very valuable place to be because they could create new synths, right? They need those facilities to continue their species. Gross. All right. So I have a question from someone who I believe to be an anthropomorphic cactus, but I'm not totally sure. So from the High Church of Messiah's Emperor, High Priest Callictus Pius, how do the clergy fit into society in terms of how they're viewed by the nobility? Are they viewed in the three categories of noble, serf, and clergy? Or is the clergy seen as integrated into the noble-serf distinction? It's complicated, as with medieval society. And we talked a little bit about this when we looked at the kind of like layout. I wonder if I still have that document at hand. Let me see. Cactus Pius. Let me see if I can find that document for you. It was in the roleplay zine, and And we talked about it a little bit, I think. The sort of great chain. Let me see what we got. So far, Verona. Do I have it here anywhere? Let's see. Chain of being. Okay, let me see. I haven't used this. I haven't used this overlay in a while, but we can take a look. Let me see if I can refresh this and make it work. I might not. Yeah, I might not be able to. No. Okay. I don't have my other PC plugged in, but we can talk about it. So what we've got is this chain of being, right? From Almighty God up top down to the non-humans at the bottom. And the line is pretty much a straight line top to bottom. If you want to follow along, it was laid out two or three zines ago. And I think I posted it in the Discord as well. But basically, it's God, the Emperor, the noble houses, as divided into the Imperial House, the Major, the Minor, freemen, serfs and employees, and then non-humans, right? But then off to the side, we have the High Church, and we have the corporates. And the High Church exists in this kind of weird place between the Emperor and the houses noble, but set aside from them, right? And within the church, individual church members, yeah, if it's in the wiki, throw that link in chat. If it's in the wiki, yeah, grab it there. So the idea here is that the clergy, yeah, there you go. Thank you, Citizen Matthew. The clergy, they fit into a weird space organizationally, but they don't exactly fit in a neat way. So let's talk about what that looks like. So any individual member of the clergy may be more or less important than any given noble or serf, right? Like there are the higher level clergy members, right? The exarchs and the priests and what have you, right? Like those people are as important, or maybe more important than any given noble, right? Like the high exarch, the chief, the pope, essentially, our space leader of the High Church is probably more important than any given noble and any given noble house's leader, because God speaketh to the emperor speaketh to the church, right? So there's that lineage where you get to be, if you're the highest of high priests, you get to be above all the other nobility in terms of spiritual influence. But that isn't necessarily true of, like, House Crux isn't going to listen to the high exarch telling them, oh, you should probably go here or follow this law or build these spaceships. It's a complex sort of side authority that they have. Now, there are also like lay members of the clergy who were never nobles, who joined the clergy to serve because they didn't have any land to work, or this is the kind of like backup job. Like, oh, I guess I'm going to go become a monk. And they are not seen as being very important, but if you gave House Crux a loaded gun and told them you got one laser shot and you have to kill either this land-working peasant or this monk, they'd shoot the peasant every time, because monks have members of the clergy, monks and nuns and clerics and all of the various forms of high church clergy folk, they have a special dispensation, right? They're considered to be, it's bad form. It's not even they have connections. It's just like it's bad form to like be rude to or hurt a priest, which members of the High Church can use to their advantage. They can get away with shit because it's like, what are you gonna do? Like, you know, we have this great illusion. We have this great illusion that we pretend that being a monk or being a priest or whatever separates us from our birth, right? Where we're like, I nobly give up my noble title to join the clergy in service to God and the emperor. But really, everyone remembers where you were born, and that's going to affect at the very least subconsciously how they treat you. So it's complicated. The answer to, are they viewed in three categories or are they seen as integrated? Both, neither. They stand apart from the order, and that's very much by design. And this gets more complicated. This gets more complicated when you start bringing in things like the new church, right? The Church of Humanity Repentant, and we'll talk about them in just a minute. Yeah, so we talked a bunch about Honglu already, so I won't spend a ton of time there. Xenobiologist Leo Anguli Daniel of House Triangulum asks, how much biotech is exclusive to Trilliant? So this is a thing, like, people ask a lot about this. I get questions from noble houses asking about if they have access to technology from other noble houses. House Aquila asks, like, can we build our own spaceships? House Aquila asks, can we build our own guns, or does Reticulum do that? Reticulum and Triangulum both have discussions about who makes what weapons, etc., etc., etc. Now, think about it this way. Everybody has their portfolio. They have the shit that they are particularly good at, but also you can pretty much, if you have tech level 4, you can make any tech level 4 thing. If you have tech level 5, you can make any tech level 5 thing, more or less. But everything is a collaboration, right? Like, House Triangulum can make a real good gun if they wanted to, but it would not match the artistry of a House Reticulum gun, because House Reticulum is about that shit. That is their thing. So, like, you can make good and cool things, but you cannot make the best, coolest thing unless that's your thing, right? No one will ever make spaceships as good as House Fornax. Now, they can make their own spaceships. They can make them for themselves, but there is a certain level of social and artisanal cachet that comes along with having it be your portfolio. That makes sense? Now, when it comes to something like Trilliant, like, their main jam is selling things to nobles so that the nobles can live forever in riches and be baller forever, right? Like you can make, House Triangulum can make biotech, but the focus of Trilliant is to make awesome baller shit, right? You'll never be able to be as luxe, right, as Trilliant is. But you can still make stuff. You can still, like, do biotech. It's not like they're the only ones. It's not a hard division. It's not like it's illegal for anyone else to manufacture shit. Otherwise, Acre couldn't exist, right? Think about this. Acre makes basically everything up to a certain level. There is nothing, spaceships, medicine, whatever, that Acre doesn't make. Acre makes literally everything. However, the best Acre thing cannot reach the levels of artistry of the hyper-specialized noble classes, right? Like, Acre's going to make you 10 billion pistols, and they're all going to work great, and that's fine. But House Reticulum is going to make you one pistol that is perfect. And the same goes for everybody with, like, a specialized thing. And this is, of course, it's all based on your tech level, right? The tech levels of the planets you have and your ability to manufacture this shit. But you know what I mean? Like, within those constraints, like, Acre is and you can see this in their branding. They've really got a good handle on this. They don't make anything fancy. They just make everything. And that's their jam. And then everybody else makes, like, specific, special, cool shit. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So, Dr. Lyra Quinn Vardum, of the Church of Humanity Repentant asks, How much of a social stigma would you imagine there to be for nobles of the major and minor houses who are CHR followers over the high church? Probably less than you think. High Priest Calixtus Pius also asked a question like this. What's the ratio of HC adherents to CHR or other divergent beliefs? It'll vary, but over the sector on average, how many people are CHR? I have no idea. I can't give you numbers, but we can talk about socially how I view the Church of Humanity Repentant. I think viewing it as like a weird splinter religion or a cult or whatever is a mistake. I think it's better to think of it as, I gotta fact check something. Early 1600s, early to mid 1600s. The Church of Humanity Repentant is Catholicism, and the Church of Humanity Repentant is Protestantism, right? Yeah. So it's not like Catholicism, Scientology. It's like Reformation era. Yeah. It's like, yes. And then there's war, right? This can be, this could be very dangerous, but it's like a legitimate or semi-legitimate religion. And I mean, look at you, like you're a faction in and of yourself. You have planets, you have stuff, like you're decently big. You're not high church big, but you're big. And I think that this is dependent on your like personal faction and kind of like where you sit and like your family. But the Church of Humanity Repentant is gaining a lot of steam, especially in these uncertain times. I think that we repeatedly underestimate social significance. But the high church, here's the other thing, is like secular power. The high church has a shit ton of it, right? The Church of Humanity Repentant as a social movement is growing, right? They're on the rise. But the high church is built in to society. It is like woven through the threads of empire. So it's very difficult to come up against that, right? It's hard to like work back against that. Yeah. So, I think that it's really dependent on like personal connections and all of that. But, social stigma varies, but I think it's less and less the more time goes on. I think that the sector ultimately, like the average person, like the average noble, the average serf, whoever, is probably getting pretty fucking sick of all the war, right? Like they just want some peace and they want to be able to relax and enjoy their fucking fizzy cheese and shit. So like, we're just sick of it. Like the average person doesn't want all this fighting to go on anymore. And we would just like to move on. And the Church of Humanity Repentant has this thing where it's like, hey, guess what? We've made a lot of bloody mistakes in the past. Let's all try to stop making those. Right? So it sucks. It's not fun for everybody. War profiteering is good for certain people, but not for everybody. Yeah. So I don't know. I think there is social stigma depending on who you are. I think each house has their own angle on this. Some are more aggressively in favor of the high church because the high church supports them, and they have their own kind of internal religious stuff. Some are less aggressive about that. So it super varies depending on your current situation. So let's see. We've got a question from House Pixis. How much, relatedly, how much do we have to appease the high church? Do all weddings have to be passed by them, or do we have a Humanity Repentant officiant to have it legally recognized? In the same question, could the high church just turn around and say somebody isn't a noble anymore? I mean, right now, the Church of Humanity Repentant is not the state religion, and so they have no secular authority. Technically, a wedding officiated by a Church of Humanity Repentant official is not a legal marriage. Like, they're not, when they're like, by the power vested in me by the state of California, you don't get no power vested in you by the state of Acheron Row, right? If you're a Church of Humanity Repentant priest, you're not officially, like, You cannot, you can't, because weddings, the purpose of marriage amongst the nobles is to perpetuate lines, right? And it comes down to the individual priest in question. So, like, if a Church of Humanity repentant priest blesses your wedding or whatever, and you go to submit your documentation, and you have somebody who wants to fuck with you, they could be like, guess what? Not legal. Sorry. You didn't actually get married. Your children are bastards. And when you die, they get nothing. And then somebody else will get to seize your stuff. So yeah, it's maybe eventually, but right now in the empire at large, that's the church as a part of the function of the state. They get to decide that stuff. Now, the high church technically can excommunicate people, but it is a power that they have to be very, very careful with. Because as I said before, they're seen as both, like, they derive their power from the nobility. And if a priest uses that power to excommunicate somebody, it has to be, like, agreed upon. There's some checks and balances there. But if a priest is like, you're not a noble anymore, you're excommunicated from the empire, there needs to be a fucking good reason for it. You need to be able to justify that shit. I don't think excommunications happen very often. They tend to be the result of a lot of political maneuvering. And basically what it means is you are kicked out of the nobility. You are kicked out of humanity. You are going to hell. You move from the top of the list to the bottom of the list. You are not a person anymore, right? Anyone can kill you or run you over or take your shit or throw you in the garbage, and you cannot do anything about it. You have no legal capacity to fight back. You are as bad as a synth, right? Excommunication is extremely significant. And yeah, Terrace Quay asked in chat, was all of House Cygnus excommunicated? Yes. And that's why it was such a huge deal, because the Church of the Church of the Emperor Messiah's Emperor excommunicated the church, the family Cygnus, so that Crux could do whatever they wanted to them, right? So that Crux was no longer murdering. It isn't civil war if the people you are killing are no longer a part of the country they used to belong to, right? Like, they're not people anymore. Do what you want. Do what you need to do. And it wasn't just House Crux, right? Like, I would go so far as to say that just about every house in the Empire got their hands on some stuff that belonged to a nearby Cygnus, right? Like, all of a sudden, your neighbor and your neighbor's flashy car and your neighbor's nice space station and your neighbor's bank account and your neighbor's cache of gold doesn't belong to a person anymore. Like, it's just up for grabs. And somebody needs to take care of that stuff. So you should probably go over there and, clear out these criminals that suddenly live next to you. And now you have two houses. And that's okay. That's legal. Because no one belonged, that shit didn't belong to me. House Eridanus probably benefited the most from this, because they had a lot of documentation that could just, like, overwrite some fields, move some stuff around and be like, well, you know what? Look at all these empty fields on my spreadsheet of who owns what. They defaulted on all of their debt, right? Suddenly House Cygnus, anything that they owned, instant repo. And I think Eridanus is still doling this stuff out. I mean, look at Gats. Who owns Gats, right? Eridanus has the paperwork, and technically they can, they have that as leverage, that they can, through the House's Minor Council, be like, look, okay, so we own this, how Gats belongs to us, or Gats belongs to Crux. It's free real estate. It's free real estate, Eridanus. Eridanus, I'm telling you. Eridanus, listen. It's free real estate. So yeah, it's a big deal. There's a lot of shit going on. An unnamed citizen of the empire has asked, how present are the different factions on imperial planets? Are there temples of both churches, crux police stations, ocula recruitment offices, serpents clinics, prism radio stations, acre supermarkets on each imperial planet? Yeah, I mean, you're all one glorious country, right? And on the surface, we all get along. So yeah, totally. Like the it's not like yes, you all have your home world and stuff where you come from, but you have citizens everywhere. And technically somebody who is a member of House Serpens can legally live anywhere in the empire. You're fine. The planets are states with their own governing body, but like technically you're all citizens of the same planetary organization, which is to say the empire, right? So yeah, I think everybody has some degree of presence on every imperial planet. That's kind of how I see it. Yeah, even Lodestone, right? Like Lodestone probably less so because there's nothing to like there's nothing to like get from Lodestone, and it's weird. Like, okay, you could, if you wanted to, live in Berlin, where there's like all kinds of amazing shit to do and like cool stuff going on and culture and whatever. Or like you could live in some like weird science community in the middle of the ocean where nerds live, if you wanted to, I guess. But like, unless you're a big nerd, you probably wouldn't want to live there. But yeah, there's people everywhere, right? There's people all over the place. So yeah,